So we're going to talk a little bit about immigration and kind of living and working in the U.S. when you actually need a visa. And then the final thing that I'm going to talk about is just kind of, if you want to start a business in the U.S. and kind of things that entrepreneurs should consider or legal considerations when you are starting a business in the U.S. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to run through a case study. So, kind of go through a fact pattern of John and Helen, who are two entrepreneurs that want to start a business together, and then we'll cover some of the topics that way. And then the final thing that we'll talk about is just some kind of tips, and the real tips, kind of if you plan on starting a business, whether it's here or in your own country, kind of just some things that I've learned along the way in terms of tips that might be useful. So we're going to start with my own story. So, 70 years, a long time ago, I was living in Canada, and I was educated there. I went to what in Canada we call it university, here they call it college. I did an undergraduate degree. It was in kind of finance, we call commerce and economics there. And right after that, I did an MBA. So went straight, I didn't have any work experience, but went and did the MBA program. So right after that, I left the MBA program and I went to work in an accounting firm. And the MBA program afforded me the opportunity to get all of the accounting credits that I needed for the CPA designation. I worked in the accounting firm and then wrote the qualifying exams to become a CPA. So after that, I went and I worked at a financial institution in Canada. And I was working there, and I kind of said, one of the things that's kind of nagging at me is that I'd really like to live and work in another country. And I was actually born in the UK, so the UK was an option for me. But also, New York being kind of the finance capital of the world, I thought that might be a good idea as well. So I left Canada. I just, kind of up one day. My parents thought I was crazy, but up and quit my very, very nice, comfortable job, left and went to Europe, went to Spain for about a year and kind of just hung out, and then came to the United States and started kind of knocking on doors and looking for a job, and found one very quickly. I still worked at Credit Suisse, an investment bank, and there I was really utilizing my CPA skills and my MBA skills because I was working in an accounting policy department, writing accounting opinions for business transactions. And so I did that for a number of years, and then that kind of nagging thing came back again, where I was kind of like, well, what if I could do anything that I wanted to do in this world, what would it be? And I always kind of wanted to go to law school. So I, again, quit my job. Again, my parents thought I was crazy for a second time. This was a much better job even than the first one that I had. And I went to law school, and I was fortunate enough to get accepted to Harvard Law School as what I call as a mature student, and went to Harvard Law School and got the degree. So then I was in Harvard Law School in the second year of law school, and I was kind of like, oh wow, I'm still Canadian, and I actually need a job when I graduate, or I have to leave the country, which is a reality of being in the United States. And so I took a big law job. I went to work at a top Wall Street firm. It was called Cleary Gottlieb. And worked there for a year. And the whole time that I was there, I was really kind of planning, it was kind of an exit strategy, because I knew that I didn't really want to do big law. And again, in the back of my mind, I thought, entrepreneur, I want to start my own business. So then while I was there, I started researching, is there a visa? Is there something in the United States that would allow me the opportunity to start a business and stay here? And lo and behold, there actually was. There was an investor visa that required a pretty small investment, and I researched the particular visa. I filed my petition, and the petition was based on kind of starting this law firm and ultimately hiring U.S. workers. And then after that, the petition was granted. So I always say to people that my first client was a very happy one, which was myself. And so then started that business around 5 years ago, and now we are a thriving law firm. We have 5 full-time lawyers, and it really is an E2 success story. So that's kind of my own personal journey, and then I'm going to come back to a little bit of that as well as we kind of go through the case study, and especially as we go through the tips and in the considerations of kind of why someone might decide to do this. In my particular case, the reason was I could have either stayed at Cleary, or it would have been very, very easy for me to find another law job in a large bank or a large corporation. But it was really a personal decision. I really felt that running my own business was something that I wanted to do. I thought it was something that I would be good at, and I thought it was something that I had the skill set for, and then decided to do it and have absolutely no regrets. Okay, so now we're going to move to a case study, and we're going to talk about Helen and John. And the purpose of this, the purpose of the case study is just so that as we go through some of the factors with respect to immigration, and we go through some of the factors with respect to setting up your own business in the United States, that we can kind of relate back to the case study, and you can have some context. So we have kind of two people. We have John is a U.S. citizen, and Helen is a Swiss citizen. And kind of note the fact that Helen is a Swiss citizen as opposed to, she's not a citizen of some other country, because that will become very important when we talk about a particular type of visa. They both attend Pace University, and Helen is a computer science major, and John is in the entrepreneur program. And Helen she's not a citizen, so she is on a visa. And she's on an F1 visa, which is a student visa, and she'll graduate. It's a little dated. I think we did this presentation a while ago, so we'll change that date to the next one. But she's going to graduate in the future, so we'll say that's 2018. She's done really well for herself. She's won a lot of national and international competitions related to coding. She's been published, so she's quite acclaimed. And we're going to consider that again when we talk about different types of visas that she might be eligible for. Then they're dating. John and Helen are a couple, and they also have a great business idea. And again, just to kind of make the case study kind of closer to real life, when we talk about the business considerations, one of the key business considerations that we're going to talk about is when you're starting a business, you have the choice of either starting a business by yourself, or it's a choice of starting a business by yourself, or you have the choice of having a partner or partners. And we're going to talk about kind of the benefits or pros and cons of that, and if you do decide to have a partner, some of the things that you should consider. They have this mobile app that could be the next, I don't know, significant mobile app, and they think it can change the world, and they have both developed part of this mobile application. And again, we're going to kind of consider that when we talk about intellectual property and some of the things associated with some of the legal considerations associated with intellectual property. So another thing, what John's done, he's registered the business as a sole proprietorship. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of the difference between registering your business as a sole proprietorship or some of the other forms that you can utilize that might afford you some liability protection. And Helen, she thought, well, I don't want a sole proprietorship, and she set up a corporation. And then her friend mentioned something about an S election, so we're going to talk a little bit about, again, when we talk about the differences between setting up an LLC, a limited liability company, or setting up a corporation, and the whole S election. They want to work together. Helen thinks that that John is the one, and that they're eventually going to be married, and they're kind of always on the same page with respect to everything, and that's going to come into play with both the immigration discussion that we're going to have and also the business discussion. And Helen, she volunteers 2 weeks a day at a technology startup company. So when I say she volunteers, she's just not getting paid. So she goes into the office and she kind of works 9 to 5, and she's, I guess, an intern or something like that, but she doesn't get paid. And John has $1,000 in the bank, and Helen has a lot more. She has $100,000 in the bank, and again, we're going to come back to that $100,000 when we talk about one of the visas that might be available for Helen. So the first question, really is, can Helen work in the United States? So the volunteer job, like how many of you think that it's fine for Helen to volunteer when she's not getting paid? So who thinks it's fine? With raise hands. Who think it's fine for Helen to volunteer not getting paid? Just a couple? 1, 2, 3, 4? Okay. So yeah, so it's not at all. So you can't even volunteer in the U.S. without a visa. There are very limited circumstances. If you go to a not-for-profit like a hospital or something like that, you can volunteer. But if you're going to work for another company and they offer you an internship, and they say, well, don't worry about a visa because you can work here and we're just not going to pay you. It's not only a violation of labor laws, but it's actually an immigration violation because you're not permitted to volunteer unless you actually have a visa. So the pay doesn't really impact. If you're getting paid, you're 100% working. But if you're not getting paid, that really doesn't impact the government's assessment of whether or not you require a visa. So the answer is no, and not without a visa. So now let's talk about different types of visas that might be available to Helen. So as I said, John and Helen are in a relationship, and John is a U.S. citizen. So the probably easiest and fastest way for Helen to live and work in the United States is if they got married. It's a legitimate relationship, and if they got married, she could probably have a green card within a year. And as soon as she files the green card application, she would be able to file for work authorization, and she would be able to file for the ability to leave and re-enter the country. So it's, within 90 days she would be able to work, and within about a year she would actually have a green card. So that is, that's one option that's available to her. So the next option that's available to her is a B1 or an F1 visa. So she's already on a student visa, so that's certainly something that she can stay on, but the student visa doesn't give her the ability to work. The other visa that's available to her, if you're entering the United States, if you're not in the United States, or if you're in the United States on an F visa, you can switch to what's called a B1 visa. So you've probably heard of a B visa. Usually B2 is a tourist visa, so someone who wants to come to the United States to kind of see Niagara Falls on the U.S. side, or they want to see the different sites, the Grand Canyon or something like that. That's a B2 tourist visa. But there's also a B1 visa, which is someone who wants to enter the United States to investigate business opportunities. So let's say that you're outside of your country and you want to apply for a visa, and you say that you want to come here to meet with prospective clients, or you want to assign office lease space, or if you want to kind of scope out whether a business opportunity might be viable in the United States, then a B1 visa might be a visa that you could look at. But again, it just doesn't get you the ability to work, and the B1 as well just has kind of frequent renewals that are going to be required. So the next visa that we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about is the E2 visa. So this is a great visa for entrepreneurs from around 80 countries. So the reason Helen is going to be eligible for this particular visa is because she's from Switzerland. So the visa is available to many countries. It's available to France, the United Kingdom. It's available to nationals from Bangladesh. It's available to nationals from Pakistan. It's available to nationals from Iran, Canada, Australia, but there are many countries it's not available. It's not available to nationals from China. It's not available to nationals from India, the two most populous countries. But for a lot of countries, it's a great visa. And what the general requirements of this visa, and that's the visa that I'm on as a Canadian. And the requirements for this visa is that you're required to invest money in the United States, and what we said is Helen has $100,000 in her bank account, and that would be sufficient for an E2 investment. She could invest $100,000, so she would spend money on leased premises, she might spend money on computer equipment, she might spend money on patent for her software application, she might buy furniture, she might spend money on marketing, all of the things like that she might spend money on, and $100,000 would be more than sufficient for obtaining an E2 visa. The other kind of piece of this visa is that you ultimately have to hire U.S. workers. So when you apply for the visa, it's not necessary to have U.S. workers. When I got the visa, it was just myself. But now, I renewed the visa for Canadian citizenship for 5 years. When I renewed the visa in April of this year, I had to show the government that I hired U.S. workers, and I was able to kind of show them W-2s that shows that the company has 5 full-time employees. So that's something that ultimately you have to do. But when you are first, applying for the visa, it's not necessarily something, you don't actually have to have employees, but instead you would put together a comprehensive business plan that showed that you plan to hire employees over a period of time. So really a great visa. It really allows you to stay here indefinitely. I lived in the United States for a long time. I have 2 U.S. citizen children that are 5. When they're 21, they can sponsor me for a green card. I plan to stay on this visa for at least that long, because it's renewable indefinitely as long as you continue to run the business, and and the business is doing well, and or more importantly, the business is able to sustain U.S. workers. So they care very little about how the government cares very little about how much money you are making. They care that you're able to create jobs and help the U.S. economy. But in terms of if you want to see if you're from a particular country and you want to see if your country is eligible for an E2 visa, you can have a conversation with me, and I can let you know. The other investor visa that is available is one that actually we see a lot of students taking advantage of this visa lately, especially Chinese nationals that are not eligible for the E2 and maybe still want to try and get a green card. So this is a visa where you invest either $500,000 or $1 million. Often what happens in the student case is the parents are gifting the money to the children. And if you invest this money, and it can be a passive form of an investment, so Hudson Yards I don't know if you've made it over to Hudson Yards, but it's a big development facility in New York. It's you could invest in that project $500,000, and you'd get a green card within a few years, and as long as the project creates U.S. workers consistent with the program, then you would get to keep the green card. So it's another kind of and this is a little bit more passive form of an investment, but this visa also does allow you, if you have $500,000 or $1 million and you want to start your own business, you can certainly do that with this visa as well. But the majority of what we see with this visa is people who are investing in the more passive form of investment. So we also said that Helen had, she'd been published, she, kind of won a lot of awards for coding. So there are 2 other types of visas, or really 3 different types of visas: O1, EB1, and there's another visa called the National Interest Waiver. But really, they all are getting at the same thing, and what they're getting at really is that the person has some type of extraordinary ability. So when you look at this particular type of applicant, it's someone that, whether it's in their home country or within the United States, if people write about them in the newspaper, or if they go to if you look at it, if they can cite academic journals, if they that publish their work and people are citing to their work. It doesn't matter that the person's kind of a student or doesn't have a lot of experience. Like this category is really just looking at somebody who is really kind of exceptional in their field. Mark Zuckerberg, probably after a very short time, if he was not American, after a very short time of even before Facebook became the kind of household name, probably would have been eligible for this, just based on kind of the people that were investing and kind of the if we put him under the entrepreneur category, probably would have been eligible under some exceptional ability category. And it's often, I find, overlooked because sometimes people are very modest when they look at their background, and they kind of see their accomplishments as just things that everybody has done. But often we've been able to go through resumes and say, yeah, you're absolutely eligible for either an O visa or a EB1 visa. We had someone who applied for an H-1B and then didn't get accepted, and she was a graphic designer, and then she had a lot of graphic design. She was from Taiwan, and she had a lot of kind of accolades in her home country that we were able to process a petition for her under the O category because she wasn't selected under the H-1B category. So definitely something to consider. Like an immigration lawyer that kind of reviews your resume and kind of sits down with you and goes through and kind of talks about your accomplishments, can kind of very easily assess whether there's possibility to, for that particular type of visa. A J visa is another visa that is possible for people who want to come to the United States, usually under, there are many different categories of J, but in the context of this class, you would be looking at a J under kind of an intern or a trainee program, so a company that wants to bring you in for a year and, as a trainee or an intern. Now, and it's a visa, but the thing you have to kind of always be wary of this visa, especially if you're eligible for another type of visa, like if you maybe want to do an F, or because sometimes in some circumstances you can work in a school under an F visa, especially if you're not getting paid. The J visa often has a 2-year home residency requirement, so that can be a pain, because what happens is after you're done the year, you're required to actually go back to you're ineligible for a number of different visas. Even a marriage-based green card you'd be ineligible for until you go back to your home country and spend 2 years. Because the purpose of that visa is really that you are coming to the United States to learn something, to take the knowledge back to your home country. So it's definitely something that if you do get a J visa, you just have to, not all J visas are subject to the 2-year home residency requirement, but it's just definitely something you have to be careful of. There's a law professor that I know that he's currently on an O visa, but he was on a J visa, and he could have gotten an F, but he didn't really realize at the time when he got the J visa. And now he's married to a U.S. citizen, and he can't adjust because he hasn't fulfilled his 2 years home residency requirement. And it is home residency requirement, just not out of the United States. You actually have to go back to your country of origin. H-1B. So H-1B is a visa that you've probably heard a lot about in the news, because it's just a visa that even though there are only 65,000 of them or 85,000 of them that are issued, it's one visa that everyone wants to talk about. But this is a visa, the bar for this visa is very low, so it just requires a college degree. So the job has to require a college degree. So it's a visa that otherwise, before say 4 or 5 years ago, it used to be a great visa, because you could get a college degree from your home country, and if there was a job available in the United States, then they could offer you the job, and as long as the job was in line with what your degree said, then you could get the visa. But then over the last 4 or 5 years, far more applicants have applied for the visa than available. So last year there were around 200,000 people that applied for the visa, and there were only 85,000 spots. So then they run a lottery, and so they just literally return the applications that aren't selected in the lottery. So it makes it a very, very difficult visa to get, because you really have, the numbers are a little bit complicated, but you really have close to a 1 in 3 chance of actually getting selected. So forget even the adjudication, but just getting selected for the H-1B. And so employers are kind of shying away from it, kind of not doing it nearly as much. And it's just a much more difficult visa these days to get. So one that people are always looking for different visa options. Okay, so those are the kind of a very brief overview of the immigration options. Definitely, as when we get to the question and answer stage, if you have particular questions about immigration, then we can certainly address that. Okay, so now we move on to legal considerations. So the first kind of consideration that we're going to talk about is kind of do it alone or get a partner. Like a lot of people are much more comfortable working with somebody, and they decide to work together. So John and Helen, for example, they get along really well, and they decided that they want to go into business together. So I went through this kind of thought process. Like, should I start a law firm myself? Should I get another person? I think with respect to the ultimate decision of what you do, like just say my only advice is to kind of know yourself and how well you work with people, and how I personally kind of like being in control of everything. So I think for me, partnership wouldn't work that well, because I do like making decisions, and kind of don't want really much interference with that. So, but a lot of people may be much more comfortable. But if you do decide to work with a partner, the kind of question comes up, should you get a partnership agreement? So that comes in multiple forms. Like if you are a corporation, it might be a shareholder agreement. If it's a limited liability company, it might be a operating agreement. But the question is, should you do it? And the answer is 100% yes, you should do it. I cannot tell you how many instances where I've encountered people who everything was fine, rosy picture. Think of even marriages, how rosy they are, and this country has a 50% divorce rate. So that is a good analogy. Like things are rosy in the beginning, but once people start to make money, like look at Facebook, right? Once people start to make money, once egos start to present themselves, things change. And the best way to protect yourself and the best way to make sure that everyone has given a lot of thought to everything, to how the company should operate, who has control, how decisions are going to be made, how people are going to be compensated, what happens if one partner dies, what happens if one partner wants to leave. What if the two partners can't agree? What's the process of resolving that particular situation? And all of those things are included in partnership agreements. And when we draft, because we regularly draft partnership agreements, and we are always sitting down with the founders, and we're kind of getting them what's important to you. Think about exactly how you would like to handle this situation. Think about it now than after the fact, because if there's nothing in the operating agreement, it can be difficult, because parties will often. I remember we were doing a settlement agreement for kind of two people who started this business together. It was a Bitcoin related business, and the business started doing well, but then the partners hated each other, and it really was a situation where, and they had absolutely no operating agreement, and they disagreed on everything. They disagreed on how many shares each of them were allocated. They disagreed on who was it that kind of had control. They disagreed on even tax papers that were formed showing what the split was. They disagreed on. They spent far more on the settlement agreement, which incidentally never ever did get signed, because they just couldn't agree on anything. And a lot of those issues that they were fighting about, they were basic things, like to think that they don't even know how many shares each of them own, right? That's pretty basic, right? Like in terms of what you would think partners when they start a company, what there would be agreement on, but even that wasn't clear between the two of them. So definitely, definitely, some of the things we put here and some of the things that I've been talking about, some of the standard clauses, but partnership agreements, they can sometimes be in excess of 40, 50 pages, depending on how complicated they are. So definitely something to consider if you decide to work with somebody. So the next kind of thing to consider in the United States is, and this will come up in every country, the names of these will just be different. So we said, in the facts that John, he set up a sole proprietorship. So, kind of the first question is, the difference between a sole proprietorship and what is the difference between a sole proprietorship and the other business forms, a limited liability company or a corporation. And there's a big difference. So the sole proprietorship is just an extension of yourself. So it's there's no protection that's afforded to you as an individual. So if you have, someone sent us a demand letter, someone sent my firm a demand letter a little while ago saying that we used their picture, like a picture that they claim that we weren't supposed to use, but we beg to differ. But they just ridiculous, because it's partly a scam, but they have this letter that they want, it's, if you don't pay us $5,000 now, then we're going to sue you for $150,000. Now this was an illegitimate claim, but it just as well could have been a legitimate one, right? Like if you like let's say you willfully or unintentionally use someone's work, like a photo, damages can range from $30,000 to $150,000, depending on the facts and circumstances, right? If it's unintentional, it's obviously going to be much lower, like closer to the $750 range. But if it's if someone goes to your website and you're sort of completely oblivious to the fact that you can't just download photos and put them on your website, you could be subject to liability. And if you are sole proprietorship, if your business isn't making money and you have a house, or you have a car, or you have other assets, then all of those other assets are subject to claim, right? So that's why people set up corporations and limited liability companies, because the corporations and limited liability companies they afford you exactly that, limited liability. So the liability is limited to those actual entities. So if your corporation is sued, if someone goes, they come to your building and they slip and fall and they say you should have mopped your floor and you don't have any insurance, they're going to sue you, right? And if you have a corporation, they can only sue the corporation. They can't sue you personally. And that's kind of one of the benefits of having limited liability protection, because while you think that, and it's one of the kind of things to really kind of understand the difference between the United States and many other countries, is here they sue for everything. It's one of the most litigious societies that exists. That's why there's so many lawyers, that they sue for everything, right? So it's very different in a lot of countries where you don't really see that type of environment. But here, I would never dream of having any other entity other than a limited liability entity. So then now we look at the two types of limited liability entities. So we look at limited liability company or corporation. And when we set up these, we regularly set them up for our clients. When we set these up, we kind of we give them a questionnaire, and we ask them, in essence, what are you thinking of doing? So a lot of the time, if someone is if it's a service-oriented business, the person has lower level of sophistication in terms of or business savvy or business experience. They don't plan on raising capital. We kind of lean them towards a limited liability company. And one of the reasons is they're just a lot easier to administer. They were developed so that they were developed after corporations. They were developed because people found corporations a bit difficult to deal with. Because when you set up a corporation, you have to adhere to a number of corporate formalities. You have to set up a board. You have to write out minutes. You have to assign. You have to distribute the shares. You have to assign officers. So there are corporate formalities which I don't think they're that difficult, but some people do find the corporate formalities a bit of a pain. Where with an LLC, they've dispensed with all of that and said that you can just draft a simple operating agreement, and a lot of people do find that simpler. The other kind of benefit with an LLC is that an LLC is what's called a pass-through entity. So in the United States, if you set up a legal entity, so let's go through a simple example. If you set up a legal entity that makes $100, and if the entity is a corporation, then the $100 is going to be taxed. So the corporate tax rate is 25%, so you're going to be left with $75. And then you are going to distribute that money to the owners, and then it's going to be taxed again. So that's a system of what's called double taxation. So in LLC, what happens is the $100 just flows straight through to the owner, and it's taxed on the owner's personal tax return. So there's no system of double taxation. And the LLC, there's nothing you have to do to kind of make it a pass-through entity. To kind of again, it just speaks again to the fact that it's just a lot simpler. The other kind of simplicity with an LLC is that it's for the purposes of tax, it's not a separate entity. It still affords you the limited liability protection, but for the purposes of tax, it's not a separate entity. So you don't need a separate tax return for it. Whereas when you have set up a corporation, you actually have to file a separate corporate tax return. So but instead with an LLC, you're just adding a page to your personal tax return, so it's a lot simpler and maybe even cheaper, because if you have a corporation, you have to file a tax return, you have to get a CPA to do it, and it actually is a completely separate tax filing that has to be done, so it's usually more expensive. So that brings us to the kind of final thing with a corporation, and one of the questions that Helen had in the example that one of her friends told her that she should file for an S election. So corporations that are held by a small number of people or one person, they do have the ability to make the corporation that same type of pass-through entity. They have to do something though. They have to file an election with the IRS, and the IRS is that S election, and then that turns the corporation into an S, what's called an S corporation. Now with that, the one time that we do kind of lean, kind of say to people that a corporation probably is the better option for them, is if you are an entrepreneur that is, planning on raising capital, if you plan on, kind of finding investors, if you, when you look at venture capital funds, if you have an LLC before a venture capital fund invests in you, they'll make you switch to a corporation. Part of it has to do with just everyone knows what the products of a corporation are, their common shares, their preferred shares, their convertible debt. LLCs, the products are membership units. They're not shares. They're not called shares. Nothing called a share in membership in a limited liability company. So the whole kind of idea of what you're offering people, you say, well, membership units. Most people are like, well, what's that? Is that similar to a share and things like that? So typically, when you are planning on raising capital, a corporation is what people tend to look for, and that's part of the questionnaire that we give to our clients and prospective clients. Is kind of ask them, do you plan on raising capital in the future? And it's something that we consider when we give them tax advice. Okay, so intellectual property. So we said, kind of in the fact pattern as well, that Helen and John were, they both participated in the coding of this mobile app, and they, so now we kind of move to intellectual property. So if you are considering becoming an entrepreneur where your product is technology, just a lot of things that you should consider. One is, from the second you start developing something, or whether you're using independent contractors, whether it's co-founders, you have to kind of have a clear understanding of who owns what, because the basis for the value of your company is this actual intellectual property. So kind of some of that can be specified in the operating agreement. If you're hiring independent contractors, when we've drafted independent contractor agreements for clients, where we make it very clear that anything that the independent contractors are working on belong to the company. We do the same thing if the company has has employees, because you can imagine that once something gets big, then everyone's going to claim that they made it. And the similar thing can be done if you have co-founders, and the co-founders are both developing the product, really just specifying up front, like kind of who owns what. And you specify it in the agreement, but also you want to consider the legal remedies that are available to make it clear who owns what, whether it's trademark, whether it's copyright, whether it's a patent. All of those things become very, very important, because people are going to be very quick to steal and copy your ideas. There are lawyers that all they do is send letters to people for patent violations, right? Like that's all they do all day long. And in some cases, like a colleague who works for kind of a large tech company, in some cases those large companies can afford, they have lawyers on staff and they can afford to just do that. But if you're a small company and someone steals your idea and you can't, you don't have a patent, or you don't have the trademark, or you don't have the legal protection, or you didn't even know that it was necessary to have, and then someone actually did it before you did it, then you're going to, you could potentially run into problems. Whenever you talk about who owns it, work with independent contractors. Whenever you have intellectual property and you are, this is just kind of a word of warning to avoid significant tax consequences down the road. Whenever you have intellectual property and you set up an entity, and you're transferring the intellectual property to an entity, you really should seek tax counsel. So like sometimes when you are an entrepreneur and you're setting up a business and you don't have a lot of money, and if you want to forego some things, like, I think the partnership agreement, very important, but the one thing you should not kind of forget is tax advice, because a lot of what you do now is going to, can have significant tax consequences, negative usually, in the future. And so having a conversation with a tax lawyer, the kind of specialized tax lawyer that specializes in kind of the transfer of intellectual property, because there are kind of a lot of special things with respect to intellectual property. We deal with when we do the E2 visas for investors. Often we have clients who have intellectual property, and we always bring tax counsel in to consult with them, because and usually they're very, very happy. They consider it money well spent. With respect to, like, if you do have a great business idea and you don't have a lot of money and you're looking for IP counsel, there are a lot of, like, if the idea is good, and there are a lot of firms that will do it for free for you. Like there are a lot of big firms, like Cooley, other big firms that will do provisional patents for free. In essence, when I say for free, they make you sign something that kind of says that if this takes off in the future, then you have to pay us. But what their hope is that they do the provisional patent, and the business takes off, and then you hire them to do the work with respect to raising capital and things like that. So often when you are strapped for cash, kind of looking at some of these other options that might be lower cost. Kind of another thing with especially with tech startups, there are a lot of incubators, especially in Silicon Valley. If you get accepted to one of these incubators, they offer a wide range of resources for investors and entrepreneurs. Okay, so then the other kind of significant thing to consider if you are becoming an entrepreneur in the United States is that because of the 1920s, there was something that happened here, which was that everyday people were buying, like, shares in General Motors that were, like, very expensive. And when you looked at the complete capitalization of the company, there's no way that the company was worth that much money. And then there was a stock market crash. So as a result of that stock market crash, where lots of people lost a lot of money, people jumped out of windows, it was just a big deal, right? Like, kind of like the financial crisis that occurred relatively recently. So with that, they implemented an act. The Securities Exchange Commission was created, and they implemented an act that highly regulated securities. So again, it's a kind of a U.S. thing, because while other countries have securities regulation, probably nothing compared to securities regulation in the United States. So when you are raising capital, so if you are, any security, so what's a common share, preferred share, membership unit, a convertible debt, if you are saying to people, give me money and I will give you a piece of this company, we'll just, to simplify it, we'll just say there are a number of things that you have to do to comply with SEC law. And there are a number of penalties, that are associated with ignoring or not complying with SEC law. So it's another, very significant, thing that has to be taken into account if you are actually raising capital. We have a lot of, this one company I recall that came to us, and they issued, they raised a couple $1 million. They, kind of sold a bunch of membership units to other people, and we kind of said, they came to us and we kind of said, well, like, kind of, you didn't use a lawyer for any of this other stuff, and we actually decided not to take the client because we just thought there was too much risk associated with what they hadn't done, and they didn't seem willing to want to do much. But I think that it's definitely something that companies, whether they're new company, might say, okay, well, I didn't know, or I can't afford it, or whatever it is but definitely something that can really come back to haunt you. And the penalties, as I said, are just very, very serious, and something that with SEC you just don't want to mess around with. Okay, so just kind of the kind of last slide really just goes to kind of things that tips, anecdotes to kind of share with myself with respect to becoming an entrepreneur, and it can just work life in general. So I think that I look to like a lot of people that start law firms, and some people do it out of necessity because they can't find a job, and others do it because they really want to run their own law firm. And similarly, I think that with entrepreneurs, there are a lot of reasons people become entrepreneurs. And my only advice to you is the necessity is a harder one, right? I think that becoming an entrepreneur is exhausting and all time consuming to succeed. And really, I think that what makes it bearable, especially in the first couple of years, is that you love what you're doing, right? So I think that when you're deciding what to do, and when you're deciding whether you want to become an entrepreneur, kind of really take a long, hard look at kind of what business you want to start, and kind of really assess whether or not you think that you're going to like being an entrepreneur, you're going to like making decisions, you're going to like not having the support of a big company, because it's not for everybody. So I think it's not for everybody. But I think that if you do kind of go through that assessment and then decide that it is for me, find something that you love, and you'll never have to work another day in your life. Because I'd say I work more now than I ever have. I've had lots of jobs, but I work more than I ever have. But absolutely love it. So another thing that always keep in mind, it's never too early to expand your network. With being an entrepreneur, it's all about meeting people. It's all about getting your name out there, and it is like so important. And there's so many mechanisms now that allow you to do that, like LinkedIn and other social media. Like you should look at your LinkedIn profiles and kind of make a chart and aim to like expand it by like 500 every like 6 months or something. It's because I cannot tell you how successful, like how much the networking and the expansion of my network has become in terms of the success of the business, of my business. And because if people don't know about you, if they don't know about your service, if they don't know about your product, they're like everybody's like they're looking at the next new thing, or the thing that's kind of at the forefront of their mind. So kind of the developing and expanding the network and utilizing the network. When I think of law school now and the number of like kind of the business that I'm getting from my colleagues who my classmates who are in law school that are now have more senior positions in companies and throw the immigration work of their from the company that they are now executive counsel at or something like that. But it's because I've kept in touch with them. It's because I send them regular updates. It's because I do presentations. It's because I so getting your name out there and getting kind of staying active. It's just essential for an entrepreneur. If you work in a large company, you can sit back. You can kind of go to their internal training, stay below the radar, that type of thing. But to be a successful entrepreneur, you're always going to need things from people. You're always, whether it's investors, you're going to want their money. Whether it's finding good staff, whether it's finding consultants to do work for you. So keeping the networks open and expanding them is really essential. It's interesting. I was reading the other day about kind of successful entrepreneurs and how much they read, and I can see that. So I concentrate on the firms, because there's doing work. Like we have legal work to do, so that's very time consuming. But I think Warren Buffett reads like I can't remember, 3 hours a day or some ridiculous amount that you'd think that he wouldn't have time to actually do that. But it's all a form of learning and keeping, because you right now you're in school and you have kind of like learning galore, right? Like you may not want to leave this class and go spend 2 hours reading a newspaper, but because I'm sure that you have lots for them to read. So, after you're done your studies, you have to keep on top of, learning is essential. It's when I look at, when I started the law firm, I said to myself, I'm not going to follow kind of the traditional mold of lawyers, like we're kind of, lawyers, they come in, they stay in their offices, they kind of, close their, all the lawyers have kind of a closed door, they kind of whatever that traditional mold was. I said, no, I'm not following it. I want to make videos. I want to, I want to utilize social media to the fullest extent possible. I want to blog about interesting topics, and not to a lawyer audience, but to, to people who just everyday people who might kind of find the topic interesting. So it's, I think that it's definitely important to kind of keep on top of that, and always be learning. And I think combined with that, and I think some of the comments I just went over, kind of the thinking outside of the box, like kind of following a traditional model could work, but I think it's I think that often people are looking for something a little different, something like something a little new, and I think that's always very helpful. So I think that one of the other kind of fortunate things for me with respect to running this business is that I am I have an MBA and I'm a CPA. So money is something that you should not take for granted with respect to the importance of budgeting, the importance of making sure that you have the money that's necessary to run the business. So it really is, because a lot of people, unfortunately, kind of, when I budget for the first year I started the firm, I had a budget. I said, okay, this is what I want to spend, this is the revenue I'm anticipating, and I would compare budget to actual and make decisions based on that. But it's really uncommon in business and for entrepreneurs to do that, and it's just so important, because it's very easy to run out of money, and once you run out of money, the business stops. So it's just something to always keep in the forefront, and really, kind of the whole idea of managing costs, right? Like managing costs, and always really just considering whether something is worth it. Anytime someone wants you to sign something you can't cancel in a month, never sign it. So it's always this. They say, well, okay, well, commit for a year, but if it's so good, won't I just want to continue? But that's why I don't want you to commit for a year. So and the other kind of thing with the business is that there are many pieces to a business, and kind of understand. You just have to kind of understand when to reach out to other people. So some people, you may not have an accounting background, but that you have to have accounting records in place. So you might want to hire somebody part-time to do that. You might when we hired somebody, we needed a payroll service. First person we hired, we needed a payroll service because there are a lot of penalties, and that whole payroll process is a difficult one. Now that we're kind of moving in full expansion mode, the whole idea of marketing and how to effectively market and kind of bring the firm to a new level, it's something that we're looking at maybe hiring a full-time marketing person or a full-time client development person. But there are a lot of like as an individual who starts a firm, there are a lot of areas that you're not going to have the expertise. And just kind of understanding that and making sure that you're positioning yourself and finding people to get that assistance. And with that, kind of the seeking advice from the right people. But and this is it's interesting. This last, and I believe this is the last one. No, the second last one. But it's an interesting tip is that when you decide to start a business, like expect for everyone to tell you, or a lot of people to tell you that you're crazy, that you should go, your parents especially they'll tell you, go find a job, real job. It's not, go, don't do it. So there's a lot of discouragement you'll get, like, and it's just because they, not everyone is an entrepreneur. So a lot of the people that you talk to, they think that what you should do is you should go get a job, like you should go work 9 to 5, and becoming an entrepreneur, there's no question that the first few years are tough, but a lot of the time if you kind of stick with it. You look at a lot of successful people, they, it wasn't kind of on day one that they were successful. They had kind of had sometimes multiple attempts at something before, but they didn't give up, and they, ended up becoming successful. And then we talked a little bit about this as well, like protecting your investment, whether it's non-disclosure agreement, shareholder agreements, patents, confidentiality agreements. But as a lawyer, I certainly think that the legal aspects are very, very important. So there's my contact information. I'm sure you guys will get these slides. So if you need it, feel free to contact me. And questions.